120. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, Carol.
We'll crack on then, I think, shall we?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the NSA Breakfast Club. This morning's topic is a very important one to me personally, riding the wave, a morning analysis of the current domestic and international lamb trade. We've got a great panel of speakers here this morning who are experts in their fields to do with lamb trade and everything. My name is Carol Hughes. I am the current Vice Chair of NSA Cymru, the Wales region. I'm currently sitting in a very wet and damp northeast Wales. Was hoping to do some harvest, but I don't think it's going to happen today at all. So I'm a partner and the family farm. We're currently farming around 1,600 Welsh mountain ewes and a small suckler herd as well to follow them. As I'm sure most of you who are selling lambs currently are very excited by the trade at the minute, and quite unexpected trade, I think you'll all agree. But yeah, no one in the livestock industry can hide from the changes to the trade experience since the UK exited the EU at the start of 2021. While some of the initial teething problems may be behind us, there are still numerous reports of delays in exporting products to the EU. There's excessive bureaucracy, increased labour needs and labour shortages, and some customers have just gone elsewhere for an easier life. Having said that, while the volumes of exported lamb to the EU have decreased, the prices have remained steadfast through the 5 months that the UK has been trading as a single entity, and export volumes to the non-EU countries has grown. Our domestic market has been strong, in part because of COVID impact supply chains, but also because of some of the effective promotional work that's been done behind the scenes. Indications are that with lower volumes likely to come forward and global demand, strong prices are expected to remain at a good level, which should reflect positively on breeding and store lamb sales later this year. So this Breakfast Club will welcome you to analyse from the specialists involved in both the domestic and international lamb trade and give some insight on what the future might hold. So I'll remind all our speakers that we'll be speaking for 10 minutes this morning. And I will, apologies if I have to just give you a few nudge or a 1 minute warning, if that's okay, just to keep things flowing this morning, because I'm sure of all our guests on the webinar this morning, we've quite a few questions, I think. So we'll try and keep it to that 10 minutes as close as we can. And for all the attendees, if you please put your questions using the Q&A facility in Zoom, and then Sean from the NSA and myself can see them, and we'll accumulate them together and have a good question and answers at the end to the panel. So we have four speakers this morning from we're speaking in three different forms. We have Mr. Peter Hardwick from the British Meat Processor Association. We have Mr. Norman Bagley from the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers, and we have Leslie Cameron and Alan Clark from Quality Meat Scotland. So our first speaker this morning will be Mr. Peter Hardwick. And I believe, Peter, you joined the Meat Processing Association in April 2019, I think.
That's correct.
And you've been appointed as the Trade Policy Advisor as part of the ongoing restructure of the organisation. Peter has worked in the international meat sector for 40 years in meat production and processing and international trading, including exports and policy. During that time, he has built up a large network of connections across multiple overseas markets and has established himself as one of the UK's leading experts in both domestic and international trade. He is a dedicated internationalist and speaks 5 languages. Is one of them Welsh, Peter?
No, it's not.
No, okay. We've got time by the end of the day to learn some then, definitely. Right, if that's okay, Peter, I will hand over to you. And like I said, yeah, well, anybody have any questions, please post them in the question and answers for the end. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for that introduction. It boosts me up a little bit more than perhaps I deserve. I certainly wouldn't say I'm an expert on the domestic market, and I probably will leave those comments to others. I think it's important just to say that looking at the current situation, it's not easy to disaggregate Brexit and the effects of COVID on exports. Certainly the loss of food service in EU markets is at least as significant as it is in the UK. But we can say with some confidence that the massive increase in trade friction that you mentioned has played a key part. Our members estimate that in broad terms, the end-to-end costs of exporting have doubled. That's due to the cost of vets, the cost of customs procedures and customs agents, and the cost of transport, of course, because hauliers have worked out that if they're going to be sitting still for a few hours at a border control post, they need to charge for their time as well as for the distance they travel. It's also true, I think, that the complexity and border friction has been a disincentive for some. End-to-end delivery times have more or less doubled. And if you factor in the needs for SPS checks, pre-notification, veterinary procedures, customs checks, etc., these all affect competitiveness in a fast-moving trade. I mean, the fact is that over the last 40 years, and I've made this point many times and I'll repeat it again, we've moved from exporting to delivering to customers in the UK and Europe in exactly the same way, with a huge amount of flexibility, with customers expecting regular small deliveries which manage their working capital and keep the product as fresh as possible end to end. And that certainly has been to some degree undermined. Another key factor has been the loss of groupage. I know a lot of work's being done on this, but it was a major feature of pre-trade, pre-Brexit trade. That is that trucks carrying multiple consignments from multiple consignees to multiple consignors. Now, if you put in the complexity of Brexit on top of groupage, you have multiple EHCs, multiple customs clearance procedures, etc. And you can imagine the huge on cost of doing that. So effectively, groupage has stopped. And it's estimated probably as at least half, possibly as much as 70% of trade was mixed or group consignments pre-Brexit. Now, a lot of businesses have worked around that, but some have not been able to. So we still estimate there's a core loss of around 20% of trade, which is a lot, actually, if you look at it in absolute terms. That said, I don't have any doubt that availability has played a major factor. And despite the price, it's interesting that I've spoken to exporters who say they could sell more if there was more to sell. And I'd have to say that's pretty encouraging. So all the friction I've talked about has been a factor, but I don't think it's been the only factor in the decline in volume. And, you know, I think that perhaps is something we can take as a positive. Businesses are working through this. There is still friction. It's still costing more. It's still taking longer. And it'll be interesting to see how that unravels in a more natural market, if that happens, of course, and there's more volume around, and buyers on the continent have more choice. They don't have quite the choice at the moment. I think it's perhaps worth making some observations about the pattern of trade, because I noticed in some of your introductory notes to this event that you talked about the decline in EU exports and the increase in non-EU exports. But we need to put that in context. The increase in non-EU exports has been 450 tons of frozen product going to the Far East. It isn't a substitute for the trade to the EU. And even against the backdrop of what I've just mentioned, 87% of exports are still going to the EU. And that underlines the vital importance of that market. I mean, turning to the domestic market briefly, I have no doubt that lockdown and staying at home has boosted domestic household demand. But again, I'll leave others who know more about that than I do to comment. And I think that combined with tight supply and supply pressure, even from the traditional non-EU sources, has been a major factor in boosting the domestic market. And there's no doubt about it, of course. On top of that, retailers have been more loyal to British than in recent times. Though I might attribute their philanthropy more to choice than a kind heart, if I'm honest, but we will see. So I think that strong domestic demand and a generally tight supply has meant there's been less to export anyway, as I've said, and that I see as a positive. But I do think there is a limit to what the consumer will pay and a point at which other proteins may be chosen. The downside, as you would expect me to say, is that for processors, margins are tight in these circumstances, and how sustainable that is, I don't know. I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at what I call a double whammy bubble buster, because you talked about a bubble, and there's a double whammy bubble buster around the corner, which we should all be very conscious of. The first part of that, of course, is even with prices as they are, what will the landscape look like as BPS is phased out, as there are fewer subsidies? You know, how much more profitable are sheep farmers today? And honestly, how will the sums look if you cut the subsidies or reduce the subsidies? And secondly, piled on top of that, and perhaps even more concerning, is the government's determination to conclude trade agreements, in particular with countries that have obvious aggressive interests in supplying our market. I mean, I'm no expert on ag policy, but I do know a bit about trade. And the signals sent out by the recent FTA with Australia are worrying, with an immediate 25,000 tonnes of access rising to 75,000 tonnes in 10 years and 125,000 tonnes in 15. We're close to doubling the access that New Zealand already have to the market. Now, the problem here is not so much the absolute volume as what the nature of those exports is likely to be. And we have ample evidence of this. An average, and I'm just using simple numbers for the arithmetic, but if you took an average dressed carcass weight of 20 kilos, then 1,000 tonnes of carcasses would take around 50,000 carcasses, sheep, to produce. But if that was just a bone-in, if they were just bone-in legs at 2.25 kilos, then for that same 1,000 tonnes, you would need 200,000 sheep to produce the same volume. Now, it doesn't take much to extrapolate, but let's say half of the 25,000 tonne quota, which we've got from year one with Australia, was shipped as legs, it would equate to a little shy of 3 million sheep to produce. And that's half of Australia's year one access. Now, if anyone thinks that this is all very hypothetical, then all we have to do is look at the profile of New Zealand exports to the UK today. Some 50% of its fresh and frozen is fresh and frozen legs. That is actually what's happening today. And mainly, and if you add boneless cuts to that, that's around 75%. And most of those boneless cuts are legs as well. Less than 3% of the trade's carcasses. So the threat is very real. That is already happening. So if anyone thinks, oh, that's a theory, no, it's not. It's actually happening today. And more importantly, I think the observation that's routinely made that New Zealand routinely undershoots their quota overlooks the fact that when the quota was established in the Uruguay round in 1992, the vast majority of the trade was frozen carcasses. So actually, I would contend that the animal equivalent volumes are undoubtedly higher today than they were in 1992, because they're sending cuts and you need to work out how many animals you need to produce that number of cuts. Now, I don't think actually the problem here is so much that has happened as it reflects demands on the market and what the picture looks like. But what will the picture look like if there are more players fighting for that same cake, competing for that same cake? Simple economics tell you what will happen. The price will be forced down. And I don't think we can realistically stand in the way of freer trade, but we do need our negotiators to pay attention to the detail and attempt to minimize the risk of imports creaming the top of the trade, because that's the risk here. If you allow an unnuanced deals to be put through, you cream the top of the trade. So I think in conclusion, and I hope I've kept to my time, I have just, I'm very positive overall, but we really do need to get the trade friction with the EU reduced one way or the other through a trade veterinary agreement or some other form of deal. And also we need to make sure that future trade deals and ideally even the Australia deal are nuanced to prevent a situation where those parts of the market where the profit is made are undermined. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter, for that. Did you get the comment in the chat? There was a point to you, I think, from Mr. Gooding, I think. Did you see that one? Can you see it?
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
I completely agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The point Mike is making is absolutely right. That the whole issue here is that the entire way that we trade with the European Union is predicated on distance trade of frozen product in full container loads, which take sometimes weeks to months to get here. It is not designed to cope with, and this is indeed the problem. It's not designed to cope with the fresh moving, fast fast trade with a near neighbour. But, you know, and Norman knows where I stand on this. This is actually the EU's monster. They will also be struggling with it in the other direction when the time comes, and the sooner the better, in my view. And it is something that needs to be addressed, but it does need proper engagement between Brussels and ourselves to make this fit for purpose. The current system, it isn't fit for purpose. But that's one thing I wouldn't lay at the door of our government.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Well, yeah, we might discuss that further in the Q&As, possibly at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Very informative and very frank, I think, discussion you had there with us. I'll now move on to our second speaker, Mr. Norman Bagley. He is the founder and head of policy at the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers, which this year celebrates its 20th anniversary. Prior to founding AMIS, Norman was a livestock auctioneer, and he's well known and respected across the country, across the industry and within government and their agencies, where he passionately defends the livestock sector whilst promoting positive change to ensure that business runs effectively and safely. So on that note, I will pass on to you, Norman.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, well known, perhaps. I'm not certain about the respected bit, but that's pretty good for a Wednesday morning. Yes, I get where Peter's coming from in the issues around export costs and the bureaucracy. I think over a period of time, they will probably dissipate to a degree, possibly not disappear altogether. But I just want to look at the context of where we are on prices. And I well remember a meeting not long into COVID, early part of last year, April, May time. And on the beef side, there was huge concern about the top cuts of steak meat, there was surplus, etc. And very much people worried about what was going to happen to the sheep meat. And I remember talk of intervention, disposal schemes, you know, all the way back to foot and mouth. And I said to Phil, I don't know if Phil Stock is on the line, look, I've got a bit of a different view on this. If we could guarantee that the prices of lambs stayed in that 60 to 80 pounds bracket through this period of time, would that be sufficient? And he said, absolutely. Well, we never got that low. So the context in all this is we spent the last 18 months initially believing the trade was going to fall through the floor, and the opposite has happened. And one has to question why, against all the headwinds that have been put in its way over that period of time, has this happened. I suppose the worldwide increase in value of red meat over this past few months, I mean, it's been pretty steep. You know, even in South America, beef now, you've got all sorts of factors affecting exports over there, from domestic bans, from deforestation, this, that, and the other. So there is upward pressure on red meat prices, which at the moment, I can't quite see where that actually is going to end. If we look at Australia, particularly, it's topical at the minute, the sky-high prices, and Peter will tell me if I'm wrong, they appeared well over 18 months before we had such prices over here in the UK. They've been riding a crest of a wave for quite a lot longer than us. And most of that wasn't based on exports to the European Union. It was other high-value markets. So I think that pressure on prices is going to remain. We also looked at why the prices have gone domestically so high. One of the things that Peter mentioned, I think is very valid, was that the consumer will have a top end of price that he's prepared to pay. And that is absolutely critically correct. The surprise is that ceiling has been found to be much higher than we might have thought 12 or 18 months ago. Because if you had said 12 or 18 months ago, domestic consumers were prepared to buy bits off lambs costing 100 or hoggets costing 160, 180 quid each, we'd have all laughed. But it happened. So the domestic consumption during a period of very, very high prices has stayed strong. So what we've done, in fact, in marketing terms, accidentally, I suppose, we've tested the consumer's willingness to pay more and found that they are. So the question is, how do we maintain that? And when I said 3 or 4 years ago that things may be different, you know, we may see lambs at 100 quid each, we may see beef back at £4. I was told it would never happen. Now it has happened. I've been told it'll never last. Well, at the moment, it's lasting quite well. We've seen the seasonal dip in lamb prices over the past 2 or 3 weeks. But as the big processors particularly get back into full transfer over from hoggets over to lamb, you get the demand back into place. And I think it's correct to say that from the sort of lows of mid last week, prices have climbed a bit again, stabilized. And again, at this point in time, it could change. They're stabilizing at something, you know, over £100 there or thereabouts. So we've still got a very, very strong market. One of the things that has come out of the whole COVID aspect is the way marketing has changed through the catering and butcher sector. So when institutional demand closed overnight, the pubs, restaurants and everything closed, my members, particularly in the catering and butcher end, had to reinvent themselves. I just thought most of them would go out of business. I'm sure people would agree. But it didn't happen. So what they did instead was to completely change their business model to selling direct to the consumer, whether it's over online, whether it's via social media, whatever it is. And the experience of the catering and butcher sector, even the very largest ones, is most of them replaced their hospitality business by at least 25 to 30%. Some of the smaller ones actually replaced it 100%. But the commonality amongst all of them is all of that meat that's going direct out, whether it's beef, lamb or pork, is actually being paid for up front before it leaves the factory. And I'll give you an extreme example. I got a small business in a very good, nice part of the world, which was doing about 15 to 20 tons of product a week into high-class restaurants, pubs, etc. And that would be on an average of 6 to 8 weeks credit. He's replaced all of that business, all of it, with direct sales to the consumer that's actually now being paid up front. And before the pandemic, he had an overdraft of $500,000, and he's now sat on $500,000 in cash. So that tells you that engaging directly with the consumer has been an enormous success. And I think it's something we need to build on. Because if we look at the levy bodies, and we've got them all on here, and they will give their views as to how they see things going forward. On the domestic market, what I call it, the attractive end of the marketing, I would actually say HCC have probably got as strong a brand as anybody at this point in time. Whereas if you look at the PGI, the QSM in England, that seems to be no longer driving value. The PGI West Country lamb, and I'm certain it's something a great deal of us know an awful lot about. So I think collectively the levy bodies have got quite a marketing challenge over this next few months. Now there's a vote of all things next spring on the future of the beef and lamb levy, which will affect everybody. So we've got a new chief executive coming into AHDB. So I think there's a huge opportunity which they will have to take to reset the whole marketing agenda, how they do it. And it'll be the same for all of the levy bodies, because you're all going to have challenges by your producers on continuing it. So one other element of the market I don't think has been maximized either domestically or internationally, and that's the halal market. Virtually none of the brands which sit underneath the levy bodies, and Red Tractor for that matter, don't have an automatic, whether it's a bolt-on or a real positive halal element. And that's been the fastest increase in marketing in beef and lamb, particularly over the last 5-10 years. So I think there's a lot of work to do there. Just on production, there is a working assumption now that when farmers have to jump through these environmental hoops to get their their payment compared with years ago, that there's probably going to be a 25–30% drop in production of beef and lamb. I've got an alternative view, as usual, mostly wrong, which is that when farmers will have been doing their financial forecasts over the last 2 or 3 years, there is no way they could have factored in lambs averaging more than £100. There's no way they could have factored in beef being well over £4 a kilo again. And I just give an example of somebody that's currently perhaps receiving 20,000 a year in support. If you look at what the returns are on their livestock, and I accept these returns can change, their livestock may be coming to 50 or 60,000 more. And unless governments will legislate to say that you have to do the environmental work, as opposed to make it a condition of getting your payments, it may well be that efficient farmers take one look at that and say, look, my stock is coming to way more. I'm not going to bother with those environmental payments. If I have the option, I'm going to stick with the market. Now, that is an outrider of opinion. I do accept that. But I think it's quite realistic. And I'm certainly talking to some friends up in the north, Scotland and Wales. There are some pretty prominent people that think that that is a scenario that may happen. As I say, what could derail it is if the government actually mandates you to do the environmental stuff anyway. I think that's unlikely. And if it is unlikely, we may not see the drop in production if we continue with the value of lambs in particular and ewes way above what we might have thought 18 months, 2 years ago. We're in a very vibrant market. It's short, and at this moment in time, it's overcoming all the barriers that Peter referred to, big though they are. So I agree with Peter that there is a strong future, I think. We will have market hiccups, we always have done, but there are ways to mitigate that. But I do think that we've got the levy body scenario at the minute. All of them have got a lot of work to do over this next 6 or 8 months before next March in demonstrating their effectiveness and making a real difference to levy payers' returns. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions a bit later on, but I hope that's okay for now.
Yes, thank you very much, Norman. That was great. Yeah, and you're right. There's quite a few questions piling in at the bottom of the Q&A. So I think Peter's started to reply to 1 or 2 now, but we'll go through most of them at the end anyway. And if anybody hasn't seen them, we'll just open it out to the. We'll read them out as well and the answers, so everyone can have a fair play for those who haven't seen it. We'll move swiftly on then to Alan Clark and Leslie Cameron. Alan is, by his accent, I think he's from Northern Ireland, I think. And apparently you're currently residing in Scotland for the last 10 years. He's joined Quality Meat Scotland since 2017. And prior to that, you were the Chief Executive of the Scottish Bakers from July 2010. And we also have Leslie Cameron, who's over 20 years experience within the food and drinks industry, including working with Kettle Produce, Maxwell of Edinburgh and Baxter's Food Company. And yourself joined QMS in September 2019 as Director of Marketing and Communications. And I believe you have a screen to share with us and some slides, I believe. So I'll hand it over to the both of you. Thank you.
We certainly do. And Norman, love the challenge that you've just laid us down. Interesting chat. So hopefully some of the things that you're going to see from us might raise your spirits, and you and I probably need to have more chats because it's an interesting debate. But just to mirror what Peter and Norman have said, so if we look at some of the market stats that we had coming through Kantar, the last set of stats we got were the end of April, the new ones are due at the end of July. But if we look at the market context, we can see category value in the UK as of the 18th of April was up 18.7% on the year previous, and that was driven by new customers coming into the category and a particularly strong Easter this year versus last year. The interesting piece as well, and it's value that's driving it, it goes back to price, that consumers are prepared to pay more for red meat. That is probably a panic buying mechanism, which is a reality of COVID. However, Scotland, who normally has a lower lamb consumption, because we tend to go towards our beef and our pork a bit more, is growing ahead of the UK. So our value is up 29.2% through that period in Easter. And if we look at the cuts that were driving the volume in Scotland, it was all of them. There was nothing that was down. So we had a good Easter. I think some of the other things we saw from a category perspective in Scotland specifically was provenance and local, and Scotch and Scottish were the key components. The clear winners throughout the Easter period were Tesco and Aldi, but we've seen butchers, which it goes back to the story. There is a place for the butchers in Scotland. They are still the #2 retailer. There's the trust. There's that engagement from a younger audience that's now visiting butchers that we've managed to maintain. So the marketing strategy that QS has got in place to support, we hope will continue to work. So I'm going to share my screen and talk a bit about some of the stuff that the levy bodies have been doing. So this up. So can everybody see it? Carol, could you give me a thumbs up? Yeah. So just a quick review of what happened last year for lamb, and a little bit of an insight into what we're all doing collectively and individually. So we talk about at a glance what happened last year. You guys saw that we ran a first national campaign, the Make It campaign, that was run by us, AHDB and HCC, where we saw a really strong campaign integrated above the line and in store. We saw for every £1 spent in retail, there was a return of £5.59, which is above industry average of circa £3. The campaign reached 74% of GB households. We brought 272,000 new buyers into the category, and we delivered 2.4 million in terms of generated revenue. So the campaign really worked at a national level. We started it I think we moved from beef into lamb in July, and then we did the joint piece again in September that we then continued from a Scottish perspective into St Andrews. So that worked really well, and you know, there's no arguing, those are really great stats. So what's happening this year? What are we doing? So we have launched our Make It with Cred summer campaign, and I'm going to just show you our video what the campaign's about. I'm just going to play the video just now. Oop, excuse me, that hasn't worked.
I think we've lost Leslie, haven't we? Alan, do you have any? Do you have the video at all on your system? We could share and press play on or not while we wait for.
I don't, but I think Leslie hopefully will be able to come back in again in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But just something that was mentioned in the chat there was about levy repatriation, and also want to talk about a little bit about what Norman said about the future of levy bodies. When I came into QMS 3.5 years ago, one of the first meetings that I had was with HDB and HCC, looking at this thing called levy repatriation. Animals move across the UK, and there was about 1.2 million worth of Scottish levy which was trapped in England, and reasonably about the same as Wales. And we ended up putting together what we called a ring fence fund, where we worked collectively with HDB, and initially that ring fence fund was 1.5 million, and then we increased it to 3 million last year. And if I'm being honest, somebody said to me, how does this work with HDB and HCC working together? And I said, it's a bit like an arranged marriage, and we just have to get on with it and do it. Give me 1 second, Leslie's just trying to phone me. Hi, Leslie.
My computer's just conked.
All right, okay. I'm waffling. So do you want to come over here and try and run it off my laptop?
Yeah, I can. My computer's just gone, like the whole computer.
Right.
Have you got the presentation?
I've got a PDF of it, but I think I've got the video as well. I can do something here. Let me see. If you want to come over, come over.
Right, I'll try and get it working again. It's just gone boom.
Brilliant. No bother. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thanks. Bye. Sorry, Leslie and I live quite close to each other, so I should come over here and try to use the internet. I'll pull up my laptop here and see if I can come in on my laptop, and I should be able to show the video. But I do have to say, what started off as an arranged marriage actually worked very well. And I think the Make It campaign last year at the beginning of COVID really forced us to work together. And this was a campaign that we had developed in Scotland just for Scotland. But we offered it out to the two other levy boards. And the results, as Leslie's already said, has worked extremely well. Now we're trying to build on that as we speak. And what we've done, we've already agreed on a number of activities that we will continue to do this year. But as Norman rightly said, we also have, whether it's a Welsh PGI or Scottish PGIs, we also have different products that we have that we're marketing. So within Scotland, we're very proud of our Scotch Lamb PGI, and that's something that we will continue to market, as well as part of an overall strategy on British Lamb. And we work very, very well with HDB and HTC in international markets. Unfortunately, COVID has put paid to a lot of trade events this year, whether that is inward missions or whether that is collectively exhibiting at 7 international events. We haven't been able to do that so far this year, but we're very hopeful that that relationship will continue going forward. We're also working very well collectively using COP26 as a catalyst about how we're protecting the industry and how we're defending it. And there's lots of work that is ongoing, and Love Lamb Week is another sort of focal point for the 3 levy boards to come together this year. And as Leslie said, we do a lot of work here in Scotland around St Andrew's Day, which leads up until November, and we'll be making sure that we will also be running that through here. Just want to try and pull this video up in relation to the future levy bodies. Norman, you're right, we're in very challenging times at the moment. HDB are going through a number of votes, and it'll be interesting to see what the outcomes of those are. But it's important to remember at the moment those votes are England only, and there needs to be consent from the other devolved administrations that if they're going to go ahead in other parts of the UK. And I think that's something that maybe DEFRA just haven't fully explained to levy payers. I'm just going to try and get in here, Carol, on my laptop and see if I can show this video.
That's fine, Alan. Do you want us to take a couple of minutes? We can just take some quick questions if you want. I know Peter's been answering a few. We can, while you're doing that, we'll just go through a couple of the questions.
Absolutely,
you don't need to answer them,
perfect.
but there's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, is that okay?
Thanks,
while you and Leslie sort it out. So I think just a couple of quick questions, just jumping out really short ones. I think maybe Peter, you could help me answer this one, and a few others. There's a question here from, has new season lamb so far been meeting spec compared to other years? Do any of you know any answers on that from your processes at all?
I don't. I've not heard to the contrary. So I don't know. That I won't be able to answer. So yeah.
It depends what spec you're talking about. The conversation around spec tends to always centre around supermarket spec. Supermarkets sell 25% of UK produced lamb. So who's asking about specs when 75% of production operates outside that that specification? So in my sector, for instance, it deals with, if you take one of the some of the exporting companies, they will have specifications of lamb from 20 kilos up to big weights for different countries, for different consumers. And it's the same back over here. You've got the wholesalers over here that serve the food service sector. And a lot of that will be for strong lambs, much heavier lambs that they're cut up. And so it always irks me a little when we actually just talk about spec and nobody talks about what spec. The amazing thing about the UK processing industry for sheep meat is they have a demand for every conceivable spec you've ever seen. Some of them will be for high value, some will be for lower. But, you know, and going to the halal market again, different specifications for different halal customers. So people need to get away from just thinking we have to produce within the supermarket spec. No, we don't.
Great, thank you, Norman. Thank you, Peter, for that as well. I'm just conscious there's a question come up on the chat, so I'm going to just take that one now quickly. So it says here, from the past 15 months, we have seen domestic consumers prepared to pay higher prices of red meat due to them having higher disposable income that they cannot spend in normal ways. Do we think farm gate prices will come under pressure when red meat has to compete with foreign holidays and visits to hospitality for discretionary spend? What are our thoughts on that one as a panel? So once things get back to normal, basically, are we going to see the quick decrease in our prices? Is it just a magic wand really looking ahead?
I mean, I just wrote a quick note to Peter on that question, because I think probably yes to the first part of his question, but the point Norman made is an important one, and that is that we're in a global market and the global supply situation remains tight. Supplies are tight, and normal economics tend to dictate that when you've got short supply and good global demand, that prices remain relatively firm. I'm perhaps not quite as confident that will persist in the long term, but I think that the short to medium term picture is certainly, because it's difficult to predict the long term, but the short to medium term, I would suggest that's probably true. But Norman may have other views.
Oh, I think that's broadly right. I mean, I did refer earlier on to the pressures in South American producing countries, particularly on beef, and I think that'll increase. You know, the demand, and we talk about recovery. I mean, Brazil was absolutely, you know, raked to bits by COVID. And, you know, you're already seeing demand in Brazil increasing domestically. And their beef prices over there have skyrocketed over this, you know, recent weeks. So I think that, you know, I do honestly believe that we are in a sustained period of higher prices. We will get ups and downs, you know, and we're not going to be protected. The domestic market isn't going to be protected like it used to be. It's going to be different. But I don't think we should underestimate the demand that's worldwide happening. I mean, if you look at Australian beef, for instance, always given as an example as to what threat Australian beef may be. And I accept Peter's point about the no TRQ, well, there will be a TRQ, but there will be a lot more of it around. What I would say is we've been importing Australian beef for the last 20 or 30 years, particularly for the catering trade. And the reason I imported it is consistent eating quality. And it has always been more expensive than domestically produced beef. So there's a message there. And that project that HCC have done on eating quality of beef and lamb, it's people underestimate the importance of that. One of the biggest criticisms of sheep meat produced by the UK is inconsistent quality. We've never truthfully done anything about it. And until we do, we're still going to get the same problems of people going out and having a bad lamb meal tonight and not bothering to go back to the pub. So I would say that in terms of the levy bodies, the more support that project that HCC have been doing for the last couple of years, the more support that can get. I would say that's the case for centrally, Alan Clark referred to it early on, some projects that they do between all of the levy bodies, the important stuff. And at the moment, I think the one that's missing between them all is this eating quality. At the moment, it's just being left by HCC. But if we're going to maintain these high prices, and I think we will, then we need something to underpin that. And for me, underpinning it, whether it's beef or lamb, is eating quality. They've done it in Australia. We don't have to do it the same, but they've demonstrated over the last 20 or 30 years that that produces higher values for their product in export markets. It's not rocket science.
Okay, thank you, Norman, for that answer, and Peter for helping out as well. I can see Leslie is back in a different room again. closer, further to the router? I'm not sure which you are now. And I've got two Alan's on screen, so I assume he has definitely got good internet, as I can see.
Alan's going to play the video, and unfortunately my laptop keeps like switching off because it overheats because it gets overworked. So Alan will play the video, then I will go back to the presentation after Alan plays it, just in case my laptop blows up again.
That's fine. Thank you very much both, and I'll
guys.
let you carry on. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Maybe I can see if I can put this up.
You might have to mute one of yourselves, Alan, sorry, in case you get some. Just mute one of yourselves. That's it.
Can you see that?
You're
Yes.
sharing screen, Alan, yeah.
Brilliant.
Ever notice these wee chaps? Those little logos mean an awful lot. They mean the beef and lamb you buy has field cred. What is field cred? Field cred means local, properly local, born and reared here in Scotland, for cheekier chops all round. Field cred means respectfully reared, better for the livestock, for better peace of mind. Field cred means quality assured, assured with independent checks on trusted Scottish farms, meaning mindful munchies. Field cred means lush landscapes, landscapes ideal for grazing, for the animals and for you. So don't just make it with field cred.
Now that is our new field cred campaign, which went live at the beginning of June. We have, I think, as Norman has suggested, we have probably done a massive U-turn on the way that we do marketing. We were very much about having 3 separate campaigns, one for lamb, one for beef, one for pork. In the last year, we've changed our strategy. We have always on activity. We have key messaging, which aligns with our consumers' values, which is driven through insight. We have changed our target market, which we've moved the dial down to 18 to 39-year-olds being primary. We can see an increase in consumption from this demographic who are now shopping in butchers, an area that they didn't want to go to before because they felt embarrassed to speak to their local butcher. They didn't want to ask pertinent questions about size and price, where if they were shopping at the fixture, they could just pick things up. So we're kind of seeing the change in strategy starting to work for us, and field cred is our proposition, and it's all about buying local, having that trusted farm, that trusted piece of red meat, and definitely Scotch being at the heart of it. So I'm going to put my presentation back up again so we can go through what the other levy bodies are doing as well and how we're aligning. So one of the other things that we did last year that I wanted to, can everybody see the screen? Yeah, that I wanted to share with you was the Lamb for St Andrew's Day. So the levy bodies did some joint activities which had suggested kicked off in September. We carried that through right till the end of November because we are very much about celebrating all things lamb for the month of November. So we will be doing this again this year. I'm probably doing a bigger and better campaign again, so growing on this success. But we saw, you know, sales of lamb up 9%, and you know we got 11,600 different schools participating in cooking lamb as well. So St Andrews is a big time for us, and we're collaborating with Institute of Auctioneers and all the work that we're doing. So when we talk about AHDB, they will be rerunning their We Eat Balanced campaign, which is about their red meat and obviously dairy, which you guys would have seen launched in January. I know the team have been working hard to ensure that their whole campaign is bulletproof, and from recollection, it's been approved and going through, so they will be relaunching that again. So what is their sort of main points? Their 5-year strategic objective is to align with consumer attitudes and purchase intent to dairy. Their messaging will be vitamin B12, sustainability and world-class farming standards, which aligns with both QMS and HCC as well, but we all each have our different points of difference to talk about. And their audience is meat and dairy waivers, where our audience we would call flexitarians, meat reducers. So we're all marketing to the same people. So their key pillars are reputation management. They are very like us, with their always on social and digital strategy. There'll be massive industry support, which will be the more collaborative piece that we'll be able to talk to you about. And the guys will be working with the retailers as well, the same as QMS have been doing through summer, because we have a lot of retail activity with Asda and Tesco's that we're doing, and a lot of out of home for summer too. So each of the levy bodies are actually saying the same things. So it is working together, but ensuring that we cover the whole of the UK with the levy money. So joint plans. We spoke about industry. So the key for us is ensuring that we put out aligned toolkits. You guys would have seen the Veganuary toolkits that HCC did, QMS did, and AHDB did. They were all very similar, but they had a slightly different slant. So these toolkits we have agreed that we will align. So you would have seen some lovely infographics that we all shared for the G7 Summit, and these were shared with our processors, farmers, the wider supply chain and influencers. The food strategy part 2 is happening 19th of July. So again, we will be putting an integrated toolkit together that will be led by HDB, but that will be tailored by each of the levy bodies. But the messaging will be similar. We've got COP coming up. So QMS is going to be the lead on the toolkit for that. So ensuring that our farmers aren't paying for 3 levies to do separate toolkits. And then we've got Veganuary, which again, QMS is going to lead on, and HCC and HDB will put their input into the toolkits that we'll send out to both industry and influencers. The other piece of work that we all agreed worked really well was Love Lamb Week. So it will be that dedicated collaborative working with our retailers and with the 3 levy bodies for Love Lamb Week. And with all things retail, you can't just do it for a week. I'm sure there'll be a price promotion that will go across the whole month of September. And then, as I said, in Scotland, we will finish off again with Lamb for St Andrews, celebrating not just St Andrews Day, the whole month of November, and all things lamb and all things outdoor, and aligning with agri-tourism as well. So we want to go sort of even bigger in November and get people eating and barbecuing with our agri-tourism partners. When we talk about export markets, we are looking at a lot of collaboration and maintaining a lot of the work that we did with the Ring Fence Fund. So we do have collaborative trade shows. So you'll see CERA, we've got RC in Canada, we've got Anuga in Germany in October. There's a lot of inward missions that we're going to be aligning, and we'll all be working with the devolved governments to ensure, you know, that we're maximising the levy money, and, you know, working with our processors and ensuring where we can that everything is consistent. So again, I just put questions. You guys have probably got a few questions that you want to ask. I noticed there was one already on our consumers going into butchers because Sainsbury's and Tesco have closed their butchery counters down. I would say no, based upon the research that we carried out last year. We had seen a trust from a younger demographic who didn't shop in butchers. The main reason was COVID. People wanted to shop locally and they felt there was a trust in their local butcher, which has been maintained. So it's actually good news for butchers. You know, Tesco's and Aldi are still winning at fixture, and, you know, Sainsbury's is as well. So it's good that butchers have found their place and they're relevant relevant to an 18 to 39-year-old market, consumer market in Scotland. So I actually think, you know, COVID has brought a lot of plus points to the red meat industry.
Great, thank you for that, Leslie and Alan. I think we'll move on straight to some questions. There's quite a few building up now. So we'll take some questions first. We've only got about 15 minutes left, so we'll move on quickly. Alan, it says here you'd like to answer a question live. Can QMS use the work done by NSA British Heritage Sheep Project? Is that something you can answer for us?
Thanks very much, Carol. I said I would answer it live because I didn't know what the question meant.
Oh.
And then I realized afterwards I could have actually answered it by typing the answer, but I'm very happy to do it live. The short answer,
yeah, go on.
The short answer is yes. I just want to check something. Leslie, can you unshare your screen? I'm seeing your screen without seeing everybody else. I'm not sure if everybody else. Perfect, thank you. The short answer is yes, and I think the key is, what is the size of the prize? What is the route to market, and what is it that consumers are looking for? Now, I think one of the things that we need to be really careful about whenever we're talking about sustainable production, we're talking about the future of the industry. What is it that consumers actually want? And what is it that they are, what are the key drivers for them? As you've seen from some of the work that we've done a 180-degree change in our marketing. We're no longer going after an older demographic. We're going after a younger demographic, 18 to 39-year-olds. We're using the word cred, which apparently is a young people's word, so apologies that I'm old and don't always get it. But it's really deciding what is it that consumers are looking for. Now, young people, for the first time that I've seen in some of the work we're currently doing with butchers, we're talking to young people, 18 to 20-year-olds, who have grown up with sustainability. Sustainability isn't something that they've had to really learn. It's something which has been ingrained within them when they go to school. So when we're looking at routes to market, what are the key drivers and what are the key mechanisms that will increase sales? Now, the British Heritage Project is one that will do that. We're more than happy to support it and to look at ways of doing it in partnership with NSA Scotland if they think that's the right way to do it. But it's also important to look at every market and where are we going to get the best return. And very interesting to see how butchers have really stepped up to the plate during COVID, to see how consumers are reconnecting with their food again, who want to know where it comes from. And we've talked a lot today about trade deals, and future trade deals are really important to how things move forward. But one of the things that we're very heartened with is that ordinary consumers are now asking the right questions. And whether that's in retail, and it's been good from a retail point of view because it's labelled, we can see that it's British product, and that's very easy to see. Food service is different. You don't always know where that meat is coming from, and that is a real concern for us. But people are now starting to ask, and part of the work that we're doing in Scotland, we're saying to people, through all our social media channels, when you're in a restaurant, ask where your food comes from, ask where your meat comes from. And this is the sort of thing now that is natural to a younger demographic, and that's something that we really want to build on as well. So it was a wee bit of a waffly answer, Carol, but I hope it covered it.
No, it's fine. That's great, Alan. Thank you very much. Norman or Peter or Leslie, do you have any further comments to that question?
I just think, we use insight to form our strategy. So we are continually, our main measure is perception. And perception is high of lamb and red meat at the moment. We measure that throughout the year. So we do quarterly dips. We work with YouGov. We put out polls with our 18 to 39-year-old demographic. And we also use social listening. And we look at what they're saying about red meat. We look at what they're saying about vegan foods. And we measure everything that we say to ensure that it's relevant to them. And that's the difference in our strategy, is we understand how to engage with them to ensure we're saying the right things. And the three levy bodies have got similar strategies. We each have different brands, but we're saying that the same things, which is aligned. And the key things is the sustainability difference. So for us, it's the Scotch difference. You can see it within the Make It With Cred. It is health and well-being. And that big thing for us is vitamin B12 and its immunity. We ran a vitamin B12 campaign in autumn last year that worked really well for us. And it's that whole consumers want to understand how the animals are reared. So it's the farming again, and with the Scotch difference. And the big change that we are moving towards is aligning with what they do in their lifestyle as well. So our campaign is about getting outdoors, and it's outdoor swimming. It's making sure that they're eating products away from the traditional kitchen set. We know that summer is like so important for barbecue, but a lot of people are climbing Munros in Scotland. So that is the change in our strategy, is aligning, and that's the one I can say, aligning with their behaviours, their values, their understanding. And I think the bigger area that we need to get to is moving the dial even further down. And that's, you know, what Sarah and Alan are doing where we can, is working with government for schools and nurseries, because there is a job to be done about the red meat agenda there. So, you know, Sarah Miller's working very closely on procurement papers, on, you know, with our health and education team, because you've got people like my daughter who's 5 years old who doesn't want to eat red meat because they're not allowed to eat it in nursery. So there is a big job to be done at a school level as well, and we are well aware of it. At every different touch point, we are trying to influence where we can, and that's where the levy bodies can come together to do a stronger job.
I think one interesting element on this, you referred to government, Leslie. I think we've got to do this pretty well on our own, if I'm truthful, and certainly in DEFRA. You know, we don't have to go back too long when, in terms of production and plans for the future, you know, pro-CAP, you know, there were different policies in Scotland to support farming there, different policies in Wales. And as you've seen by recent events in Scotland and previous in Wales, DEFRA completely overturned that stuff. You know, there was a Sherpa sent down to Cardiff to sort out Welsh government to make sure they get away from this direct support stuff, which they, you know, Elizabeth Griffiths was promoting, and then suddenly withdrawn when Renda went down there. You've got the same in Scotland, another Sherpa sent up there to sort out, you know, even ministers resigning or getting rid of because they supported a really good report by my good friend Jim Walker. So we know what government thinks. How do we know it? Well, Henry Dimbleby is now coming out and he wants a meat tax. So the Green Blob in DEFRA is totally in control of the whole of UK policy on consumption of red meat. They want less of it. End of story. So I think one of the unsung bits of work that the levy bodies have been very successful at over a period of time, it's been drip drip, I accept that, but your various policies of using high profile chefs and people being given very, very simple menus and all this sort of stuff, it's unsung work. But what my people are using, what my catering butchers are doing, is actually using that material. So when they send these boxes out, when they actually market this stuff direct to the consumer, it goes out in boxes now with DHL or whatever. Inside there, some of that material that you guys have been producing, it goes in there. And it's not being ripped up and thrown in the bin. People are looking at it and think, Christ, I didn't realize you could, you know, use lamb for that particular thing. So this whole direct sales to the consumer is something which all of the levy bodies need to build on more, because what you've been doing before that happened, now with that happening, the stuff that you've been battering away at for the last 4 or 5 years suddenly is getting into homes in boxes, which is seen by people. It never used to happen. So I think, you know, we all criticize the levy bodies, and sometimes that's justified. But that work, you're not actually telling people out there how successful that's been over this past 18 months. You've just got to do more of it.
And I think that's been the key to our success, Norman, because we relaunched the Butchers Club last September. We're in the process of relaunching the Chefs Club, which is, you know, got 3 strategic pillars in terms of how we're going to align it with the consumer as well. But the uptake that we've had since we've rebranded and relaunched, the calibre of material that we're sending out, you know, the butchers are just overjoyed. And, you know, we brought Gordon Newlands in as well, and he's been absolutely fantastic at engaging. Unfortunately, the poor boy has been locked down again, because when he got out to see a butcher and did some filming, the butcher had COVID. So, but, you know, that is definitely, you know, it's that whole customer journey is ensuring that we communicate at every stage. So it's that pre-awareness and enticement, and then when they get into store, especially within the butchers, the traditional point of sale works. And the thing that we found that they want to take away and the butchers are using is the booklets. So we've just had our summer barbecue one that's gone out for all 3 brands, and it's all about everything barbecue. It's got hacks, it's got tips, but our whole strategy is underpinned on social media by that as well. So it's all about that integrated piece, the pre-awareness, the in-store, and creating that loyalty. And if we keep that going and we all work together, because each of us have the same strategies, we're just doing it in slightly different ways. So I think, you know, yeah, you're right, we can be criticised, but I think each of the levy bodies are getting to a good place. We just need to keep going bigger. It's that continuous improvement. And it's always getting ahead of the game. What's the next thing? How do we stay relevant? How do we keep that going and not stagnate and become stale?
Your point's well made, Norman. And just to add to that, since we've done that relaunch and really focused on these booklets, and another thing that we're doing at the moment, one of the reasons Gordon is out and about in different butchers at the moment is we have video and also static cameras with us, because the amount of butchers that have moved now into websites and e-commerce that weren't doing that over a year ago, and they're coming to us looking for material and for good high quality photographs that they can use and so on. And that's part of the work we're doing at the moment. So it's not just in booklets, but as a direct result of that, we have recruited an extra 110 butchers into our Butchers Club in the last 7 months. And that's something we will see continuing to grow. And we're now putting our efforts into the Chefs Club. We have Princess Anne, who is patron of it, and apologies, my cat has just come into the room. And
I see your cat's got a few comments there as well. It sounds like Alan.
Yeah, I think he actually voted at a board meeting once. But so my apologies for that. But it is good to get recognition of the things that are happening. And I know it's easy to criticise the levy bodies, but I have to say I came from I was chief exec of Scottish Bakers for 7 years before I came here. And I have to say the commitment that I see from the individuals that work here, we as an organisation, we're 25 people, we're turning over 7 million a year, and the output of the work that is done, I think, is exceptional. And I think there's examples of that across AHDB and HCC as well.
Okay, thank you all. I can see Peter is busy typing answers to some of the questions. So if any of you, if we do not get through all your questions, I think Peter is getting through them rather quickly, actually. So you can have a quick look at the Q&A bit, and Peter's answered a lot of them there as well. But there's just one that's been targeted for Peter and Norman from Wynne. Trade is firm now due to retailers switching to all domestic products from imported products such as New Zealand lamb and Muslim festival Eid. That festival is showing buyers are now buying in anticipation of Eid. Are your members having any staffing difficulties as we approach the autumn season to ensure there is no backlog in production lines, as this could impact on autumn prices? And Peter, you've given quite a good answer for that one, but Norman, do you have any comments at all on that?
In terms of plant staff, it's well known that there are shortages in different areas. Ours at this point in time isn't critical. I can quite see a situation going forward where it might be. At the moment, it's manageable. The bigger problem we've got is the attitude of FSA to things like the Muslim festivals. And they are trying to put in the way of some plants some absolutely ludicrous rules, which could limit and will limit the ability of those to serve those festivals. So we're in a logjam with them completely at the minute. There's hardly anybody in there that understands the damn subject anyway. So it would be, there will be regulatory problems unless we can get those resolved. Staffing, I think I saw Peter nodding. The retention of staff is a big thing. It's you know, if you're a plant that operates on a system where you do have, say, 10% you know, turnover annually, it's a challenge. There is a theory that when furlough starts winding back, that more people will become available. That is a distinct possibility, but only time will tell. There's no guarantee. I think in the other supply chains, where there is a well-known serious problem, you know, lorry drivers, HGV people, this, that, and the other, it's a totally different ballgame. That is a serious challenge. So on the production side, we're okay. Potentially pressures further down the line. But on the supply side, on the logistics side, there are some serious challenges.
Great, thank you, Norman. I think any of you, if you want to read what Peter's also answered, I know he's still busy typing, so you can go and read what he's answered that as well. But I think it links in well with what Norman has said. So I just got another question. I know, Norman, you mentioned about quality and tasting before. There's a couple of questions cropped up about that. So just to the whole panel, really, on the question of eating quality, you're never going to get consistency with as many different breeds and crosses, and also changes to age, slaughter. From what I can see, most supermarkets and local butchers try to work with selected farmers to get consistency. Will this trend increase now in the future? There's also a similar question that's come up about how variable is that in UK lamb kill, the eating quality. What are the issues, taste, texture and fat, what needs to be addressed, really? So I think it's generally about the quality and taste of the meat that we've been discussing.
I think the quality scheme is, in the main, it's post-farm gate. You know, the animals arrive in, and so long as they are not unduly stressed for any other reasons, it's how they're treated from the point they get into the lairage. And a lot of the work that's being done, you know, fat content, if you go back 10 years, Alan and others will recognize this. Everybody wanted lean, you know, and the guys that talked about intramuscular fat and all that sort of other stuff were just laughed out of court. You look at all major retailers now, they've all got, you know, individual schemes, whether it's Angus or Shorthorn or Longhorn or whatever it is. They've all got one thing in common: they carry a lot more fat. So there's always been a criticism of too much fat in sheep. I get that. But even there, if you go into the London markets, you know, they want these damn great big chops with plenty of fat around them and this, that and the other. So it's how it's treated. It's the maturation period. It's the packaging. And the world leaders in packaging, you know, have been New Zealand. I mean, over the last 10 years, they've increased their shelf life by about three or four times, which has given them the ability to send product over here that remains fresh for an awful lot longer than what it used to. So it's systems. And what we've just got to do is learn to make sure that in the abattoir and the processing plant, that quality element of producing that carcass to give it the best chance down the cool chain to mature and stay tender, etc., and consistent. That's where the processing side can, you know, can offer its help. I think on the, you know, the argument about too many breeds, I think we'll all be dead in the sky before that argument is resolved, to be perfectly honest with you. Everybody wants less breeds, but then you look around sheep and cattle at the minute, and all the talk is about the old breeds coming back in. So, you know, farmers have a way of selling what their product, a brand. So the classic example of that, for instance, is Herdwick lamb being exported to China and Hong Kong. Who the hell would have said 10 years ago, A, would Herdwick still be here? And second, would they have a hugely high value export opportunity in the Far East? Nobody would have said that, but it's happened. So I wouldn't denigrate all these different breeds. If, you know, if you look at a farmer that, you know, has got a breed that everybody thought was going out of fashion, and he's found a niche market for it, and instead of the lamb being worth 100 quid, it's worth 220 quid, why shouldn't he do it? So, you know, people have got to be open-minded and less hung up about we just need 4 or 5 key breeds. It's the same argument about just needing 4 or 5 abattoirs. No, we don't. We need to spread around the country. We could probably do it more, this and the other. In the main, we've got a good mix of abattoirs, from the large to the small to the micro, the ones that have, you know, moved with the times, and especially some of the smaller ones. Huge advances there. So I think the marketplace is in a great place. I just think that the levy bodies need to refocus now, thinking of it next year in votes, and just remember that levy payers out there are waiting for you, the levy bodies, to tell them, look, what are you going to give us post the vote next year? What is it? What's the plan? What's the future? You know. So there we go. That's my thoughts.
Great, thank you, Norman. Does anybody else like to comment on that before we?
Yes, Carol. I think just in terms of eating quality, I've been in QMS now for 3.5 years, and I'm not a farmer. I don't come from the red meat industry. I've been on the biggest learning curve of my life in the last 3.5 years. And I hear eating quality come up all the time, and usually it comes up at farmers' meetings. I've never heard eating quality once come up when we do consumer panels. I've never seen eating quality come up once when we do all our market research. And one of the things that talking to butchers recently before lockdown, we had a number of key butchers from across the UK who were taking our product. And I said to them, do you not get criticised in your local town because you're not supporting your local farmer and you're taking Scotch down in England? And they said to me, we buy it for one simple reason: consistency. We can get that consistency. We were in Japan with some of the people who are on this call today, and I have to say, we were talking about British meat, and not once was there a question on consistency. And I think if you're looking at what they've done in Australia, they've had to work with some maybe poor quality meat, and they've had to really look at a marketing system that is fit for purpose. So I would go back to consumers. What is it the consumer wants? And then meet their needs. And to me, that's the focus of the levy body.
Can we just, I mean, there's no way we can have a meeting like this and agree on everything. So I'm just going to have a little dig now. And then Alan and I will repair our relationship after a pint somewhere further down the line. What I would say is, over the past 18 months or so during COVID, particularly the independent catering butcher sector have absolutely majored on quality to underpin what are now extraordinarily high prices compared with a few years ago. And they are getting requests from their restaurants and from their pubs very much into dedicated supply chains, out of different breeds, out of whatever it may be. And absolutely underpinning that is a message that if we're going to give you, farmer, $4.50, $4.20 a kilo, whatever it is, we need a product we can work with. We need a product that we can turn into something higher value to differentiate the price. And I'm sorry, Alan, but down here, certainly at the top end of the catering butcher sector, quality is top of the pops at the minute. But anyway, I'll buy you a pint, whatever happens.
You don't need to, because I totally agree with you, Norman. And you know, the clue's in the name. It's Quality Meat Scotland, and that's what we're about. But we do produce quality products here in the UK, and I think it's important to make sure that we're continuing with that message across the consumers. But I think we'll maybe have a couple of pints, Norman.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much both on that. I think, Sean, have we got one more question? Time for one more question or not? I can just see that the recent announcement of Morrison's being bought out is flagging up quite a few questions on the chat as well. I was just wondering quickly before we pull this meeting to an end, is there any major comments on that? I think there's some. Obviously, Morrison's has been known to be very supportive of British farmers. Are the panel generally concerned about that going forward in the future?
I'm happy just to make a comment. I'm sure Norman and Peter may have, but you know, Asda was taken over by Walmart. Things did change. I think we're going to have to ride it out to see what their buying policy is going to be. But you know, fundamentally, they have agreements in place, so you would hope that they are going to maintain their existing supply. And you know, the market is looking for local, so it would be remiss, you know, of that to change. You know, Asda is owned by American, they're still buying British, and they're still buying Scotch and Scottish. So fundamentally, there is a demand for local. So you would expect the business taking them over to at least understand the UK market before they make any fundamental changes.
I wouldn't see a fundamental change. I don't know what Peter thinks, because if you look at Morrison's, theirs is the most integrated system of meat supplies that exists. So the only way their new owners can break that down is actually move away from the integrated supply, which perhaps 10 years ago they could have done. But there are now so few large processors that, in fact, it would be out of the frying pan into the fire, because they would have to team up with one or two of those other processors, which I just do not see, with the lack of extra capacity at the large end of processing. Are they going to turn around and ditch that? I'd be very, very surprised.
Well, I having worked for the meat processing end of Sainsbury's when they still had it, in the last days that they had that business and they did get rid of it, I guess that's always a possibility, but I think I agree with you, Norman. I don't see that happening, mainly because of that relationship between their processing and the stores. I would agree with that. I've seen it happen, however, so I've seen the other side of it.
Great, thank you very much for that, for those answers, and thanks, Sean, for letting me have that last question before we leave. Just to say, apologies to anybody who haven't answered the questions today. I know Peter's been busy typing. There's a few answers come up and replies, so do have a quick look at the Q&A chat, Q&As if possible. There probably has been some sort of answer, and we have discussed broadly everything really, I think, that's come up on there. I know the halal one's been as well, but I think at the moment the time is going and we're going to be opening a big can of worms, I think, if we dive too deep into that discussion as well today. So just a quick thank you from me. Thank you to all our speakers, Norman, Alan, Leslie and Peter. Thank you very much for a great informative morning. I think everyone will agree that's joined the webinar today that they've definitely learned something off it, and maybe looking a bit more insight as to what's going to happen in the future for our businesses really as well. Thank you to everybody who has joined today. We've had a great number of participants and a lot of good questions as well come ahead. Again, apologies if I haven't been able to go through them all. It's just a bit of for looking for the future. Our next NSA Breakfast Club webinar will be on the 5th of August, sorry. This is discussing the farmer's role, a morning discussion to inspire activities during Love Lamb Week, which I think is very, very topical. And we've covered quite a few of that today with Alan and Leslie, Norman and Peter. We've covered quite a lot of that about, promoting and everything of the lamb. So yes, I think that's, we'll put it to a close for today. Thank you very much again to everybody who's been speaking. Thank you very much to participants, and I hope you have a drier day than I'm going to have anyway, and enjoyable the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Very much, Carol. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thanks, Carol. Well done.
So, thanks, Carol. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All finished?